guys, I'm Travis, and welcome back to Swan Song Games Part 2. If you missed the first one, that one covers everything from the NES to the N64. This video is going to pick up with the Dreamcast, but before we get started, I just want to go over again how I've selected each Swan Song game that you're about to see. First of all, every game is going to be a platform exclusive that was released in North America. And second, not every game is going to be like the true last game released for a console. Instead, it'll be a game that came out right around the time a successor console was released. So, with that said and done, let's kick it off with one of my favorite consoles of all time, the Dreamcast. After the Sega Saturn's failure, Sega was up against the ropes with just one more chance to try to win back the goodwill of fans and compete in an increasingly crowded console market. The Dreamcast was Sega's answer. The system itself was way ahead of its time. It was the first console to have built-in online functionality with SegaNet. It had the VMU, which offered dual-screen displays, and even the first modern open-world game with Shenmue. Seriously, this thing was a pioneer if there ever was one. But sadly, it wasn't enough. Sega was already hurting financially when the Dreamcast launched, and on top of that, Electronic Arts refused to support the system. Piracy was out of control, and the menacing shadow of the DVD-playing PlayStation 2 was always looming over Sega in the distance. Sega eventually pulled the plug on the Dreamcast and their involvement in the console business as a whole on January 31st, 2001. For a console that was only around for a little over 2 years, it made a lasting impact. Even today, many fans still look back on it as one of their favorite systems of all time. The final Dreamcast game to be officially released was NHL 2K2 on Valentine's Day 2002. But its swan song could really be a number of games. Phantasy Star Online version 2, Alien Front Online, or even Shenmue 2. But since this video is about North American releases, and that game never made it over here, let's go with Sonic Adventure 2. Coming out just 7 months before Sega ended support for the Dreamcast, Sonic Adventure 2 follows a similar formula to the first Sonic Adventure, with the main difference being its addition of 2 intersecting storylines, Hero and Dark. The Hero path puts you in control of the usual Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles. The Dark path sees the first appearance of Shadow the Hedgehog, along with Rogue the Bat and even Dr. Eggman Robotnik himself. In the time between Adventure 1 and Adventure 2, Sega improved the visuals of the game, but overall, the whole package kinda feels like a step backwards from the first game. The new characters add some variation to the gameplay, which should be a good thing, but the problem is, the only ones that are really any fun to play as are Sonic and Shadow. Their stages offer the speed and style that you play Sonic for. And as for the others, well, they'll probably just put you to sleep.
I got it!
Now, I'm not trying to be too hard on it. The game is still decent and worth checking out if you're a fan of 3D Sonic games. But one thing is for sure, Sonic Adventure 2 definitely marks the beginning of Sonic's downward spiral into Hedgehog hell. His games only got worse and worse from here on, and it would be a long time until they started to be good again. As for the Dreamcast, it found its way into clearance bins across the world until every last console was liquidated. It sold 9 million units worldwide. Filling the shelf space that the Dreamcast left vacant was the PlayStation 2. Sony saw massive success with the PlayStation 1, so the hype for the PlayStation 2 was high, maybe too high. Yeah, we never did get those Toy Story quality visuals, but we did get a system that could play games like Metal Gear Solid 2, Final Fantasy X, and it could even play your DVD copy of Freddy Got Fingered. I know it's a little odd to talk about DVDs so much in a video that's supposed to be about games, but it's impossible to understate just how important they were to the success of the PlayStation 2 and in turn, the demise of the Dreamcast. When the PS2 launched, the games weren't really there yet. It wasn't until a year or so later when games like Onimusha Warlords and Gran Turismo 3 started to show up. But even before those games, you couldn't find a PS2 anywhere, due in a large part to the fact that it was the cheapest DVD player on the market. The system's DVD capabilities and its incredible library of games, ranging from the likes of Grand Theft Auto to Guitar Hero, resulted in the PS2 becoming the best-selling video game console of all time. With official support for the system lasting all the way into 2013 in some parts of the world, how do you pick its swan song? Well, I'd put it 4 months after the release of the PS3, in March of 2007, God of War 2. Before Kratos was an angry dad, he was, well, still pissed off, just not a dad, at least that he knew of. Just like every game in the series before 2018's God of Boy, God of War 2 is a no-holds-barred hack-and-slash action game with fast combo-based gameplay and some light puzzle fare scattered throughout to give you a break from all of the god slaying. In the God of War's second outing, we see him stripped of his godlike powers and be reduced to a mere mortal. Just like Disney's Hercules, only if Hercules wanted to murder Zeus and everyone else that stood in his way. Seriously though, I forgot how brutal the violence is in this game. Even now, compared to the carnage in games like Mortal Kombat 11, God of War 2 is still a little bit shocking. But it's also gorgeous. The game absolutely pushes the PS2 to its limits. Kratos cuts his way through one massive action set piece to the next, all in a seamless motion that never dips below 30 frames per second. God of War 1 was a big success, but it was God of War 2 that saw Kratos evolve into one of the PlayStation brand's most recognizable characters. And as far as I can recall, the series hasn't had a single bad game to change that yet. It's unlikely that the success of the PlayStation 2 will ever be topped, but that didn't stop others from trying. Just like Sony had done a generation earlier with the PS1, a new player entered the console space: Microsoft.
Xbox! What's up, bro?
I gotta change my locks.
Yeah.
Bill Gates, you never cease to amaze the rock. Never cease to amaze the rock. You're right again. Today isn't about you, it's about the new Xbox.
The original Xbox was the most powerful console of the 6th generation, with its built-in hard drive, broadband internet capabilities, and even a DVD player. In some ways, the Xbox was the evolution of what Sega started with the Dreamcast. The system expanded on concepts like SegaNet and vastly improved on it with Xbox Live. Hell, the Xbox almost had Dreamcast backwards compatibility built in. At E3 2002, Microsoft announced its online service, Xbox Live. It had features that are common today, like a friends list, voice chat, and online handles that would later become known as gamertag.
Plus, you get to pick your gamer tag, you know, your online identity.
The template that Xbox Live started is still seen today on, of course, the Xbox, but also PSN and even Steam. The Xbox was home to console-exclusive games like Halo, Fable, Elder Scrolls Morrowind, and MechAssault. The Xbox Swan song, the game that sums up the console's 4-year lifespan, has to be Halo 2. If you weren't around for this game's launch, let me sum it up for you. It felt like the video game equivalent of opening night of a new Star Wars or Avengers movie, which is something that never really happened in video games back then. Fans lined up on November 8, 2004 for Halo 2's midnight release while sipping on Mountain Dew's Gamer Fuel. Leading up to its release, Bungie had one of the craziest marketing campaigns lined up for Master Chief's second outing. At the end of one of Halo 2's earlier trailers, there was a flash, blink and you'll miss it image of a mysterious website called ilovebees.com. On the website, its supposed owner was asking for help because her page was being hacked by a mysterious intelligence. This led to players solving problems that led them to real-world locations, where one determined crazy Florida man ended up waiting for a call at a payphone just minutes before Hurricane Francis hit, just to get clues for the next piece of the puzzle. After the bee mystery was solved, the lucky winners got a chance to play Halo 2 on the big screen before it was released. Against all odds, Halo 2 actually lived up to its massive hype. I'm sure most people look back on Halo 2 fondly, but it's probably not as good as you remember it. It really shows its age in its single-player campaign today. You go back and forth playing as Master Chief and the Covenant elite called the Arbiter. The cutscenes really help you learn more about the lore of Halo, like who the Covenant are and what the Flood is. But when you boil it down to its gameplay, most of its levels are just shooting through hordes of enemies, advancing forward, shooting through another horde of enemies, rinse and repeat. Online multiplayer was definitely its best feature. Fans loved it so much that some just didn't stop playing, forcing Bungie to keep servers up longer than intended. All said and done, Halo 2's campaign may not be quite as thrilling as it once was, but it's still one of the most important and highly praised games to ever be released, with its multiplayer innovations such as clans and matchmaking still being used today. And that's Halo 2. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Something I talked about.
Something. Thanks for stopping by, Sean.
Yeah, it was great. It's been a while.
Always a pleasure. We're doing this now.
We're keep doing that.
All right.
Later.
Anyway, next up, we're going to talk about the Nintendo GameCube. So, stay tuned. The Nintendo GameCube. The fan-favorite lunchbox game console hybrid that was home to some remarkable games. Everything from Animal Crossing to Metroid Prime. Yet, the GameCube underperformed, and it ended up finishing in last place, behind the PS2 and the Xbox. So what happened? The way I see it, the GameCube was Nintendo going through growing pains. They were stuck in this weird balancing act between sticking with what worked for them in the Super Nintendo days, while trying to evolve with the times. Nintendo did finally make the leap from cartridges to these little mini DVDs, which did help to counteract piracy, but it left the GameCube without a DVD movie player, which, as you know at this point, that was very important at the time. And no, the Panasonic Q doesn't count. Also, with Nintendo being, well, Nintendo, they didn't think that players would care about online play, and they all but ignored the internet for the entire generation.
Am I so out of touch? No, it's the children who are wrong.
While people were enjoying Halo 2 on the Xbox or SOCOM 2 on the PlayStation 2, you could play two games online on the GameCube. Oh, and its lack of a Mario game at launch was a big stumble out of the gate. Sorry, Luigi, we love you, but you can't fill your brother's shoes.
Mario!
Even with the GameCube's shortcomings, Nintendo did deliver on one thing: games. Besides the ones I mentioned earlier, there are plenty more great ones, many of which have never been ported off of the console. And that brings me to the GameCube's swan song. The final exclusive released for the GameCube was The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess. When Nintendo first unveiled the GameCube, they showed a realistic looking tech demo of what Zelda could look like on the system. Then, a few years later, they put out Wind Waker. Nothing against Wind Waker, but obviously, it looks nothing like that original demo. Needless to say, some fans were upset over this new cartoon Link, until Twilight Princess was revealed and made grown men cry. It delivered on the dark and mature Zelda that Nintendo had originally showcased. Acting as basically a spiritual sequel to Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess is still great. It does play a lot like Ocarina, with its main difference being the addition of the Twilight world, in which Link anamorphs into a wolf where he can leap and bound across the Shadow Realm. When this game came out, it was criticized for sticking too close to the Ocarina formula, but today I find that to be its biggest strength. I'm enjoying this one even more now than I did back when I first played it. Twilight Princess remains a solid entry in the Zelda series, even though its wolf segments can tend to overstay their welcome a bit. Why does your game console need a handle? I don't get it. Who uses this? But anyway, the GameCube wraps up the 6th generation of consoles. So from here on out, things start to get a bit more modern. So next up, we have the Xbox 360, followed by the PlayStation 3 and the Wii. Stick around. As the first system to kick off the high-definition generation of consoles, the Xbox 360 took all of the best aspects of the original Xbox and refined them. Besides becoming more ingrained with Xbox Live, the 360 saw the introduction of many features that are now commonplace on consoles. Stuff like achievements, digital storefronts, and an online-centric user interface that let you see what your friends were up to. Microsoft got a one-year jump on Sony and Nintendo, giving them them a head start that helped the 360 to become the best-selling incarnation of the Xbox yet, with 86 million units sold. Though, for everything the 360 did right, Microsoft did get a few things wrong.
Give me red rings? What? Nothing, Mom. You low.
The system was plagued with hardware failures, with the infamous Red Ring of Death, and Microsoft made the mistake of going with HD DVDs instead of Blu-ray. Yeah, remember that thing? Issues aside, the 360 was home to some awesome exclusive games. Of course it had its Halos, but Gears of War made its debut appearance on the 360. And probably most importantly, the 360 was absolutely integral to the rise of indie games. Thanks to Xbox Live Arcade, early hits like Super Meat Boy, Braid, and Castle Crashers were able to break onto the scene, helping to pave the way for another small indie hit like Minecraft to eventually become the most popular game of all time. In the final year leading up to the release of the Xbox One, the 360 didn't have too many exclusives, at least ones that weren't for the Kinect. Ugh. Released in November 2012, the Xbox 360 swan song is Halo 4. At this point, Bungie had already left Microsoft and Halo behind so that they could make Destiny. So, for the first time, Halo was passed off to another developer, 343 Industries. I can't even imagine the pressure that they must have felt making this game. Trying to follow up legendary games like Halo 2 or Halo 3 is quite the feat. Surprisingly, 343 pulled it off, mostly. Halo 4 succeeds in the fact that it feels like Halo, but that's kind of its biggest downfall too. It doesn't take any risks, it's just that, more Halo. The game's story focuses on the relationship between Master Chief and the Windows 10 assistant, Cortana, which at the time was praised by critics, but fan reception was a little mixed. I think much of Halo 4's lukewarm reception probably had to do a lot with the fact that when this game came out, the series just wasn't as popular as it was in its glory days. Plus, competition in the FPS genre was, and still is, more crowded than ever, with Call of Duty, Battlefield, and even Microsoft's own Gears of War stealing some of Master Chief's thunder. Nonetheless, Halo 4 is still a solid entry into the series, if not a bit unremarkable. Every major video game company always seems to fall for the third console curse. Nintendo had it with the N64, Sega was basically buried by it with the Saturn, and Sony got its taste of it with the PlayStation 3. The PS3 was Sony's first misstep. At the beginning, it was rough to be a PS3 owner. Maybe it was sheer arrogance on Sony's part after its record-breaking success with the PS2, I don't know, but whatever it was ugly. And Sony came out of it looking completely out of touch.
PlayStation 3 will retail for $599 US.
You might say, hey, that seems kind of expensive. Well, don't you worry, because Sony says you can just get a second job and pay for it, so it's all good. Cost aside, the PlayStation 3 was actually a very powerful machine. Its cell processor allowed for some truly impressive visuals, but the problem was that it was incredibly difficult to develop for. This resulted in games that were built from the ground up exclusively for the PS3 being mostly awesome, but in turn, many of its third-party games were inferior to their Xbox 360 counterparts. Eventually, Sony did cut costs and slim down both the PS3 itself and its price to something a little less insane. With its Blu-ray player and free online gameplay, Sony already had an edge on the 360. Now that its price tag was lower, the tides started to shift in Sony's favor. They pumped out one amazing exclusive game after another. Metal Gear Solid 4, Uncharted, God of War, Infamous, Little Big Planet 2, Gran Turismo. Really, the library of exclusives on the PS3 is phenomenal. So which game game was the PS3's swan song. There's really no question. Having played video games for most of my life, there are just a few games that I can remember playing for the first time where I had to stop and take a moment to realize that I was playing something truly special. Games like Metal Gear Solid, BioShock, Mario 64, and The Last of Us come to mind. Released in June 2013, just 5 months before the launch of the PlayStation 4, within the first 20 minutes of The Last of Us, you're already fully invested in the game's world, story, and characters. You're probably on the verge of tears, too. As Joel and Ellie, you progress through a visceral, violent, post-apocalyptic America that pulls you in deeper to its story every minute. Naughty Dog is known for their attention to detail, and The Last of Us proves no exception to that. Whether it's the subtle nuances in a character's facial expressions, or even the way their bodies move in and out of cover, all of these details only make you feel more emotionally attached to the characters.
Jesus!
The Last of Us remains an essential game that stands with the best of them. It's best experienced firsthand, so definitely give this one a playthrough if you haven't already. And now for a complete shift in tone that I have no good way to transition into, let's talk about the Wii. After suffering 2 back-to-back commercial failures, Nintendo needed to change things up. They pulled a complete 180 on their console design philosophies with the Wii. Instead of trying to compete with Sony or Microsoft on a level of sheer graphical power like they had in the past, this new Nintendo was more than happy to let the competition make the jump into high-definition gaming, while they stayed behind to focus on innovating in the ways we actually play games. You probably don't need me to tell you this, but their gamble paid off. The Wii was a massive success, selling over 100 million units in its 14-year lifespan. This time around, Nintendo wasn't content to just win the hearts of millions of nerds around the world. They wanted to rope in their grandmas, too. Nintendo broke down the barrier of entry to gaming by eliminating the need to learn buttons on some complicated controller, and instead essentially turned Granny's body into the controller. Never mind the fact that she probably bought the system just to play Wii bowling until it turned into a paperweight, and this was kinda the Wii's biggest problem, the gimmick factor. Of course, there were some incredible games released on the Wii, but there was also a Dosen the Giant-sized pile of shovelware. After the novelty of waggling your arms at the TV wore off, you were left with some otherwise incredible games that were just hindered by forced motion controls. But oh well, I'm sure none of this stopped Nintendo from swimming in a vault full of money like Scrooge McDuck. But anyway, what are we talking about? Right, Swan songs. The last game of really any consequence to come out for the Wii that wasn't Just Dance or Barbie's Dream House Party happened about a year before the launch of the Wii U. The Legend of Zelda: Skyward Sword. Noticing a trend yet? So, I'm just gonna throw it all out on the line here. I don't like this game. Like, not even a little bit. Even now that I'm reviewing the footage that I captured again, I'm getting upset. You know, when you sit down to play Zelda, you have an expectation that you're going to be in for a dense world to explore, puzzles to solve, and an epic story. This game is that, I think. It just seems to do everything in its power to make getting to the good bits of Zelda as annoying as possible. Yes, there's motion controls, which is to be expected, but that doesn't mean I have to like it. There's hours of tutorial, dialogue interruptions, this guy's punchable face, more dialogue interruptions, these irritating bird flying sections, oh, and did I mention more dialogue interruptions? Seriously, is there any other Zelda game with this much text? Sometimes it's even downright cringy. All right, maybe I'm being a little too hard on it. I will give it credit for a few things. The motion controls for Link's sword do actually work pretty well. Being one of a few games to require the Wii Motion Plus attachment, the sword movements do feel accurate and precise. And the art style is nice. It's sort of a blend of the fully cel-shaded style of Wind Waker meshed with the realistic style of Twilight Princess. And as always, the excellent music that Zelda is known for is all here. I'm just amazed that they didn't give you a tutorial on how to listen to it. I missed the boat on Skyward Sword when it first came out, and I'm only playing it for the first time now. That might be why I dislike it so much. And yeah, maybe I didn't give it a fair shake, having only played it for about 3 hours, but I'm confident that I've played enough. They don't make a drink strong enough to ease the pain of going back to this one. If you're itching to play a Zelda game, check out one of the dozens of other better games in the series before you pick up Skyward Sword. Yeah, I know it's a little unpopular to hate on Zelda, but that game, not for me. Even when it comes to the Switch, I don't think I could recommend it. But moving on, the Wii actually marked the end of the 7th console generation, and it was Nintendo again that kicked off the 8th, although you might have already forgotten about this next system. Oh boy, here we go. The Wii U was easily Nintendo's biggest mistake since the Virtual Boy. Released in November 2012, the Wii U saw Nintendo finally embrace HD graphics. But it suffered from confusing marketing. Was the thing a new console, a handheld, or was it a new controller for the old Wii? Who knows? It had almost non-existent third-party support, though some at least tried at first. And further adding to its marketing confusion, it has an absolutely terrible name. I understand that Nintendo was trying to ride on the success of the Wii, but why not just call it the Wii 2 or even something completely different from the Wii brand altogether? The Wii U managed to scrape by with 13.5 million units sold worldwide, which is frighteningly close to Dreamcast territory. Thankfully for Nintendo, the 3DS was enough of a hit that the handheld was able to carry them through the Wii U train wreck. Today, Nintendo does its best to pretend that the Wii U didn't exist, with the vast majority of its exclusives having since been ported to the Switch. However, the system is kind of turning into like the Rocky Horror Picture Show of game consoles, with a small, passionate fan base still raving about it today. I mean, after all, the Wii U is still the best place to play virtual console games, and it does have a few titles left that haven't been ported yet. For having such a troubled existence, the Wii U sure went out with a bang, with, you guessed it, Devil's Third. Nah, I'm just kidding. It was The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. Now, that's more like it. Again, just like with Twilight Princess, Breath of the Wild was also a Switch launch title, but it was built for the Wii U. With that said, Breath of the Wild is arguably the best Zelda game that Nintendo has ever crafted. And for a series filled with masterpieces, that's saying a lot. Nintendo reinvented the open world genre with Breath of the Wild, breathing new life into a formula that has remained basically the same since it began. The game doesn't hold your hand, unlike Skyward Sword. Instead, Link is given the freedom to explore a vast world filled with shrines to track down and new cooking recipes to discover. The best part? It's all there for you to find, almost instantly. Breath of the Wild allows you to make your own adventure. I know it's a corny phrase, but in the case of this game, it's the truth. You can go to anything that you see on the horizon, only limited to what you want to explore next. You could even run straight to the final boss if you wanted to. Although you probably won't last long. Even though the gamepad exclusive features to the Wii U ended up being nixed, and the Switch version does perform a little bit better, Zelda Breath of the Wild is still a masterpiece on the Wii U. And just like many games that bring new innovations to the medium, all kinds of Breath of the Wild clones are just starting to pop up now, with, I'm sure, many more on the way. They say imitation is the finest form of flattery, but I think it's also a good indicator of how you know a game is a true masterpiece. Yeah, the Wii U was, something. But I wouldn't worry about Nintendo, because the Switch is doing great. And speaking of the Switch, it doesn't have a Swan song, at least yet, because that system's still going strong. And I really wouldn't be too surprised if when the time comes, it ends up being Breath of the Wild 2. But we'll see. Anyways, there's only 2 consoles left, the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. So we'll keep things moving with the PS4. After Sony suffered through their awkward phase with the PS3, they came back stronger than ever with the PlayStation 4. From its reveal that showcased big AAA exclusives like Killzone Shadowfall, Infamous Second Son, and Deep Down. What happened to that game anyways? All the way to its November 15th, 2013 release date, the PS4 consistently blew away expectations. Sony kept this positive momentum going throughout the PS4's entire lifespan, with games like God of War, Bloodborne, Uncharted 4, and Marvel's Spider-Man being playable only on PlayStation. Sony has announced that they will continue to support the PS4 for years to come, well into the life of the PlayStation 5. This makes picking its Swan song a little difficult, since it might not have even come out yet. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to think of games like Spider-Man Miles Morales or Horizon 2 as PS5 games first, with their PS4 versions being secondary ports. So that leaves us with really just two games that could be considered the PS4's swan song: Ghost of Tsushima or The Last of Us Part 2.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
Yeah, I don't really feel like talking about The Last of Us again. So, the PlayStation 4's swan song is Ghost of Tsushima. Coming from Sucker Punch Studios, the same team behind Sly Cooper and Infamous, in Ghost of Tsushima's gorgeous open-world version of feudal Japan, you control Jin Sakai as he fights the hostile invasion of the Mongols. This is a game I want to like more than I do. Its graphics are beautiful, its design decision to use the wind to guide you instead of the minimap is clever, and its combat presents a challenging, fun experience. But I found its reliance on open-world video game tropes to be a bit of a turnoff. Its mission structure is identical to Grand Theft Auto 3, which came out 20 years ago. And now I feel ancient. You go to a location on the map, watch a cutscene, follow a character to a different point on the map, kill some bad guys, complete the mission, and repeat. Maybe this isn't as much of a problem with Ghost of Tsushima as it is just with my fatigue of modern open world games. For me, Ghost is at its best when you're exploring its stunning world on your own, finding upgrades or ascending monumental structures to locate new shrines, which was my favorite part of the game. It's at its worst when you were just simply going through the motions of clearing the map of new story missions. Just to be crystal clear, Ghost of Tsushima is a good, highly polished game, and my issues with it seem to be pretty isolated. The general consensus is that people really like this game, so I don't want to dissuade you from trying it out for yourself. Oh, and Sucker Punch did add a multiplayer component in the game's Legends mode for free, something they probably could have charged for, so that's pretty cool. I haven't tried Legends for myself yet, but it's supposedly really good. The Xbox One is a perfect example of just how important a console reveal can be. While Sony had a straightforward PS4 showcase filled with one big game after another, Microsoft did, well, not that.
Television, TV, television.
TV remote, TV experience.
TV. For Call of Duty.
Yeah, this whole reveal was a disaster. Microsoft spent more time talking about apps, features, and Call of Duty dogs than they did games. It was also initially unclear if you would even be able to play pre-owned games on the Xbox One, resulting in this legendary jab from Sony.
This is how you share your games on PS4. Thanks.
Back in 2013, it is important to keep in mind that with mobile gaming on the rise, many analysts expected that consoles were on their way out. Needless to say, these speculations didn't turn out to be true. However, Microsoft definitely had these gloomy prophecies in mind when they revealed the Kinect-centric Xbox One as more of a living room entertainment hub instead of a dedicated video game console. Over the next 7 years that followed, Microsoft did change their messaging and added in features like backwards compatibility and new hardware revisions with the Xbox One X and S. But it was too little, too late. The damage was already done. The Xbox One, no, not that Xbox One, was in last place out of the gate, and it stayed there the entire time by a pretty big margin. But it's not all doom and gloom for the Xbox One. Microsoft began to shift away from console exclusives. They did keep their mainstays like Halo, Gears of War, and Forza close to home, but for the most part, we've seen a new Microsoft begin to evolve into a games for all mentality. I mean, regardless of which platform you play on, I think we all owe Microsoft thanks for being probably the biggest push for cross-platform play in the video game industry. Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo, and PC gamers all playing together. I'd have called you crazy if you told me that was going to happen 10 years ago. Probably the biggest addition to the Xbox platform was Xbox Game Pass. Yeah, that's right, with the Xbox One having barely any exclusives. Let's mix things up. Game Pass is the Xbox One's swan song. Launching in June 2017, Xbox Game Pass followed in Sony's PlayStation Now footsteps. Except, Microsoft did things right. Sony and Nintendo are still banking on their deep catalogs of exclusives to sell consoles, but Microsoft seems poised to bring a new strategy to the 9th console generation. One that's more in line with something like Netflix instead of one of a typical video game company. Sure, you can pay $70 for Elder Scrolls 6 on the PS5, or you could sign up for Game Pass on the Series X or the PC and play it there for a lower cost with hundreds of other games included. It'll be interesting to see how this pans out for Microsoft. And at the end of the day, it's a big win for gamers. More games to play with less money up front. I just wonder if we may even see Game Pass show up on the PS5 or the Switch a few years down the line. I guess time will tell. So with the Xbox One and Game Pass, that wraps things up. Unless, with some weird stuff peppered in there too, like the Ouya. I said I was going to talk about the Ouya, didn't I? God damn. Alright, let's keep this brief. The Ouya was the infamous Kickstarter console that originally promised an Android-based open-source platform where all of its games would be free to try, at least in some form. So what was the problem? The Ouya hardware was cheap and unreliable. Its game selection hardly differed from what you might find on your smartphone, and Ouya backpedaled on their messaging constantly, eventually removing the free-to-try aspect from its game store. The Ouya console was discontinued in July 2015, and the plug was pulled from its online store in 2019, essentially making the Ouya equal to a brick today. As for its swan song, well, there were actually a few poor, unfortunate exclusives that never made it off the system. And then there's Towerfall, which was an Ouya launch game, and it remained an exclusive for 6 months until it was thankfully ported elsewhere. You probably know it as Towerfall Ascension today, and it's still a great game, especially with its multiplayer mode. The Ouya was dead on arrival, so yeah, its swan song, for the purposes of this video, is also a launch title. Alright, it's actually done this time. I want to say thanks again to Sean for coming by and covering the Xbox, and of course, thank you, as always, especially if you made it this far. I know this video is not short, so I appreciate it. Anyway, see you next time, and thanks.